Eliza's hands moved with steady precision, dragging the last bale of hay into the stall as the wind kicked up dust from the canyon cliffs. The horses stamped and whinnied, their hooves echoing on the wooden planks. A shadow flickered across the main road, caught in the last streaks of crimson sunset. She froze, one hand on the pitchfork, ears straining over the groan of the gate swinging in the wind. A rider emerged, hunched and staggering, boots dragging through the dirt. Dust coated his coat, his hat slumped low, and a trickle of blood ran from a gash above his brow. He stumbled toward the ranch, calling out hoarsely, "Please, I need help." Eliza's breath hitched, but she didn't move until he reached the corral. His horse had collapsed, kicking weakly at the dust, its flanks heaving. She grabbed the reins, steadying it, her fingers brushing the raw leather. "Slow now," she said, voice firm, betraying none of the unease crawling up her spine. The rider slumped against the fence. "Outlaws," he coughed, blood speckling the dirt at his feet. "They're coming for the whole valley. They've been taking everything." Eliza's eyes narrowed. "Then you've got to hide," she said, moving quickly. She helped him into the barn, slamming the doors against the rising wind, and tied a rope across the entrance. The air smelled of hay, sweat, and gunpowder from old storms long gone. The rider's gaze flicked to her, eyes wide and wary. "Who are you?" "Eliza," she replied, adjusting the straps of his saddlebag. "And you, don't move until I say." Her hands were calm, but her pulse hammered in rhythm with the distant coyote cries echoing through the canyon. Footsteps crunching in the dirt beyond the fence made her spin. Two riders approached cautiously, scanning the ranch. They didn't see her behind the barn wall, or the way she gripped the hammer at her hip, ready to strike if they drew near. "Stay quiet," she whispered to the injured man, rolling him onto a pile of straw. She lifted a lantern just enough to check his wound, her eyes catching every glint of metal and shadow outside. One of the strangers dismounted, boots striking the ground sharply. The other's hand hovered near a pistol. Eliza felt the old adrenaline ignite, a whisper of skill she hadn't needed in months. The ranch wasn't just hers. It was a fortress if she remembered how to use it. The wind shifted. Dust swirled around the corral, and the riders froze for a moment, scanning the darkness. Eliza's fingers found the rifle tucked behind a post, checking the chamber with practiced ease. Her gaze lifted, steady and unflinching, catching the faintest twitch in their shoulders. The horses snorted nervously, ears forward, tails flicking. Somewhere in the canyon, a snake rattled its warning. Eliza's heart pounded, but she didn't falter. The night was far from over, and the first of 3 encounters had already begun. The wind rattled the barn doors like bones, shaking the lantern in Eliza's hand. Shadows danced across the corral as hoofbeats pounded closer, uneven, threatening. She pressed the injured rider behind the stack of hay, ears straining for the snap of a twig, the scrape of leather, the whisper of boots on dirt. The first horse appeared at the fence line, nostrils flaring, eyes glinting in the lantern light. A man swung down, gun drawn, voice low and mocking. Well, looks like we found ourselves a little widow all alone." Eliza's hand brushed the rifle at her side, lifting it just enough to catch the glint of the moon on steel. "You'll find this ranch isn't as empty as you think," she said, voice calm, steady, carrying the weight of someone who'd known hardship and survived. The outlaw laughed, a hollow, rattling sound. "Little lady, don't play clever. Hand over the horses, hand over the supplies," or he let the threat hang in the air. A gust of wind sent dust swirling, stinging Eliza's eyes. Her heart beat in rhythm with the horse's restless snorts, each muscle coiled, ready. She slid behind the fence post, counting steps, noting shadows, tracing the angle of the moonlight on the corral's edge. "Now," she whispered to the rider, "grab that lasso. Stay low." He hesitated, fear etched into his face, but obeyed. A rope swung silently through the air, catching the first outlaw's leg and pulling him off balance. He cursed, kicking at the dust, and the second outlaw's hand went to his pistol. Eliza fired a shot over their heads, a warning sharp and precise. The sound cracked like thunder across the canyon walls. The first outlaw scrambled to rise, swearing, but Eliza's aim kept him pinned. She darted between shadows, sliding the rifle across the corral gate as the second outlaw hesitated, caught off guard. Dust filled the air, stinging eyes, coating the boots of the intruders as horses stamped and whinnied in panic. "You're in my home," she said, letting the rifle rest in the dirt for just a heartbeat before picking it up again. "And I don't like thieves." The outlaws exchanged glances. Panic, doubt, and a flicker of respect crossed their faces. They weren't expecting a woman to anticipate every move, to know the land like she had, to control the night with nothing but grit and instinct. A whip of wind tore across the ranch, rattling boards and scattering dust. Eliza lunged, grabbing a lantern and swinging it toward the second outlaw's face. He flinched, giving the first a moment to regain balance, but Eliza was faster. Another lasso looped around her wrist, another shout cut off by the clash of ropes. Footsteps ran across the porch. She didn't look back. Every movement was calculated, every breath measured. When the last outlaw finally stumbled back, defeated, cursing into the night, Eliza lowered her rifle. Her hands shook slightly, but her eyes burned with unyielding resolve. The night was still alive with whispers of danger. Somewhere beyond the fence, more shadows moved, unseen, watching. And Eliza knew the first encounter was only the beginning. The first rays of dawn cut through the canyon, painting the corral in gold and pink streaks. Eliza moved among the horses, her hands quick and steady, but her eyes never left the ridge. A faint crunch of gravel made her pause, fingers tightening around the reins of a restless mare. He emerged from the dust haze, riding tall, boots clean despite the long trail behind him. Wyatt, the same rider she had helped the night before, now alert, confident, and calculating. His coat was dust-streaked, but his eyes held a clarity that made her chest tighten in ways she didn't yet understand. "Eliza," he called, voice low but firm. "You got a fire in you I didn't see coming." Her eyes narrowed, scanning the horizon behind him. "And you've got a knack for appearing at the wrong, or maybe right moment." She didn't lower her guard, not entirely. Wyatt dismounted, boots crunching on sun-warmed gravel. He approached the barn, eyes catching every movement, every shadow in the corral. The injured man from the night before stirred but remained hidden, watching silently. "They're still out there," Wyatt said, voice dropping. He pointed toward the canyon mouth. "The gang that got to you last night, they won't give up. Not easily." Eliza's gaze hardened. She measured distance, wind direction, every ridge that could hide a threat. "I can handle them," she said, and in her voice was the steel she had carried through months of solitude. Wyatt studied her, noting the quick, practiced movements of her hands as she adjusted a horse's saddle and checked the fence. "You're not just a widow," he said slowly. "You've got eyes and instincts like a gunslinger." Eliza's jaw tightened, a flicker of pride hidden beneath exhaustion. "I learned a few things from my husband," she said. "Things you don't expect from someone alone on a ranch." A sudden rustle beyond the fence made them both turn. Dust lifted in the wind. Horses snorted nervously, tails flicking. Wyatt's hand hovered near the rifle at his side. Eliza's fingers brushed the hammer at her hip. "You're stronger than I thought," he said, a hint of admiration threading his words. "I was counting on surviving this night alone. Seems like I misjudged who I was following." She didn't answer, letting her gaze sweep the horizon, counting shadows, noting every flicker of movement. The canyon whispered danger, and she felt the familiar rush of adrenaline. A lone vulture circled overhead, its wings slicing through the dawn sky. Eliza's pulse quickened, not from fear, but anticipation. Wyatt's presence beside her was steady, reassuring, yet it also carried a challenge, one she couldn't ignore. "Let's make sure they don't get the chance to come back," she said. The words were soft, but in them lay command and unspoken promise. Wyatt nodded, respect and curiosity in his eyes. Together, they watched, waiting, poised for the coming storm. Somewhere beyond the ridge, the gang stirred, unaware that the widow of Red Creek Ranch was no ordinary woman, and that their next move would meet not just skill, but legend in the making. Dust whipped across the corral, stinging Eliza's eyes as the gang burst over the ridge, shouting and brandishing guns. Horses snorted, hooves tearing at dry dirt. The first outlaw fired, the bullet splintering a fence post. Eliza dropped behind cover, rifle ready, heartbeat pounding in time with the pounding hooves. "Stay low," she shouted to Wyatt. He crouched beside her, calm but alert, eyes scanning every shadow. She gripped the rifle tighter, feeling the weight of it, the promise of justice in her hands. The outlaws spread, circling the ranch like predators. One swung a lasso toward the barn, another kicked at the gate. Eliza moved like water, sliding from cover to cover, her aim precise, each shot ringing across the canyon. Horses whinnied and stamped, raising dust that made shapes of enemies and phantom threats alike. Wyatt's voice cut through the chaos. Eliza left side. She pivoted, catching an outlaw's pistol just as he raised it. With a flick, she knocked it aside, stepping forward to lasso him to the ground. Another rush from the corral's edge. She spun, swung her rifle like a club, and sent him sprawling into the dust. Gunfire and shouts echoed off the canyon walls. The horses surged, kicking up clouds of sand and scent of sweat. Eliza's pulse was a drumbeat in her ears, but her hands were steady, every movement a calculation. The widow of Red Creek was no longer hidden behind grief. She was the storm. Wyatt joined her at the gate, blocking an outlaw's path. They moved in tandem, instinct and trust weaving them together. "Where'd you learn that?" he called over the roar. Eliza's eyes met his, and for a heartbeat, the chaos around them disappeared. "From the man I loved," she said, voice steady. "And from surviving." The gang faltered, seeing a force they hadn't reckoned with, a woman who anticipated every move, who turned the ranch itself into a weapon. Dust flew, bullets ricocheted off barrels, and the wind carried the metallic scent of danger and sweat. One by one, the outlaws fell back, retreating to the shadows of the canyon. Eliza chased none, letting the terrain and her strategy unnerve them. When the last gun clicked empty, silence settled over Red Creek, broken only by the horses' heaves and the distant cry of a hawk. Eliza lowered her rifle, hands trembling slightly from the rush, but her eyes burned with a quiet triumph. Wyatt stepped closer, admiration and relief in his gaze. "I underestimated you," he said, voice low. She gave a small smile, the first real one in months. "And they did too," she said. The canyon seemed to exhale, the wind carrying her victory across the valley. Somewhere, an old storyteller would later whisper her name around campfires, children leaning in wide-eyed. The widow of Red Creek Ranch, quiet and grieving no longer, had become legend. And in the golden light of dawn, beside Wyatt, she allowed herself to dream, not just of survival, but of love again.